I've driven Oregon's Highway 101 more times than I can count, but it never feels the same twice. Some nights it's calm, long curves through mist and pine, ocean whispering just out of sight. Other nights, it feels alive. The last time I took that road was almost 3 years ago. It was late, close to 2 in the morning. The fog was so thick it looked solid under my headlights. I was alone, halfway between Tillamook and Cannon Beach, with nothing but static on the radio and the low hum of tires against asphalt. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through a vent. But this sound had rhythm, breath between syllables, like someone whispering through a cracked window. Then it spoke. Not loud, not clear, but enough for me to freeze with my hands on the wheel. Don't stop. I glanced at the CB radio mounted under my dash. It was off. I hadn't used that thing in years, but the voice had come from it. I was sure. I flipped the switch on and waited. Just static. The kind that feels like silence, only angrier. I told myself I was tired. 14 hours of driving will make you hear things. I turned the dial a few times, trying to find a channel, but the static never changed. It didn't fade. It didn't spike. It just stayed. I kept going. The fog thinned a little around the next bend, and I remember feeling almost stupid for getting spooked. And that's when the CB came alive again. A whisper, closer now, softer, like it was sitting in the passenger seat. Don't stop, Ben. I slammed the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked. The truck fishtailed before straightening on the shoulder. My name. It said my name. I stared at the CB. The switch was still off. Every hair on my neck stood up. Before I could think, another voice came through. This one a woman. Ben, don't look in the mirror. I froze. Slowly, like I was defusing a bomb, I turned my eyes toward the rear view. There was nothing there, just my own reflection, and fog. A sea of it, curling like smoke behind the glass. Then movement. Something crossed behind my tailgate. Quick, heavy, almost human. The shape barely visible through the red haze of my brake lights. I spun around, but there was nothing. Only fog. And then my headlights started to dim. The beam flickered like candlelight in a draft. I twisted the key. The truck sputtered, coughed, then went silent. The headlights died. The dashboard went dark. The world around me disappeared. No phone signal, no other cars. Just the sound of my heartbeat and waves crashing somewhere beyond the cliffs. Then, a click. The CB came back on by itself. The static hissed, soft, steady. And then a man's voice whispered right against my ear. You shouldn't have stopped, Ben. I didn't breathe. The air in the cab turned cold enough to see my breath. The voice laughed. Quiet. Low, like someone laughing with their mouth closed. Now they see you. I turned the key again. Once, twice, nothing. And then the headlights came on, but they weren't aimed at the road anymore. There were shapes standing in front of the truck, 6 of them, shoulder to shoulder, perfectly still on the center line. Their outlines shimmered in the fog, tall and wrong, like shadows standing upright. I couldn't see faces, just silhouettes, black against gray. I blinked once. One of them moved. It stepped forward, jerky, like something trying to remember how to walk. Another followed, then a third, their legs bent too far at the knees. I grabbed the ignition again, twisting until my wrist hurt, begging the engine to start. The CB crackled. A dozen voices whispered in unison. Keep driving, keep driving, keep driving. I slammed the gear into neutral and tried to roll backward, but the tires didn't make the right sound. It wasn't gravel. It wasn't asphalt. It was soft, wet, like I was rolling over mud that hadn't existed a second ago. The fog pulsed. The figures started moving faster. They didn't walk. They glided, their heads twitching side to side, necks bending like broken hinges. Then I saw their faces. Each one glowed. Light poured from their skulls. Twin beams of cracked glass and filament wires snaking into the fog. Their eyes weren't eyes at all. They were headlights, embedded, glowing white. Their faces were torn open around the glass, and where there should have been a mouth, there were wires sparking blue and white. The CB screamed. Not words, just shrill, distorted feedback that stabbed straight through my skull. I covered my ears, but it didn't stop. The figures started to run. Their movements were a blur of jerks and spasms, like they were being pulled forward by invisible hooks. One hit the hood. The impact dented the metal deep. Its glowing face smashed against the windshield, blinding me. No expression, no eyes, just light, burning, shaking, screaming through glass that cracked with the sound of breaking ice. I threw the truck into drive. The engine caught, finally by some miracle, and I floored the gas. The creature rolled off the hood as I shot forward, tires screeching. The others scattered, flickering in and out of the fog. I couldn't see them anymore, but I could hear them. Feet dragging, metal scraping, a soft, wet slapping noise, like someone walking barefoot through puddles. The CB hissed again. "They're not behind you, Ben." I looked left, and there it was. A glowing face pressed to the side window, upside down, crawling along the roof. Light pulsed through shattered glass where eyes should have been. Its mouth opened, spitting sparks that hissed against the glass. "Drive." That voice wasn't through the CB. It came from inside the truck. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the gas pedal so hard my foot slipped. The truck fishtailed across the fog-slick road, skidding, toward the cliffs before catching grip again. The fog thickened until it was like driving underwater. The road twisted under me, shimmering like oil. The speedometer needle hit 60, 70. The CB clicked again. "You're almost out." I didn't believe it. I didn't dare look anywhere but straight ahead. Then I saw it. A faint yellow glow breaking through the fog. The kind of buzzed, dirty light you only get from old gas stations. I pushed harder. The fog thinned as I broke through, my tires crunching gravel. I skidded to a stop beside a single, flickering sign that read, "Coastal Fuel, open 24 hours. I killed the engine and just sat there, shaking. The fog behind me stayed thick. A wall of white that looked solid. The CB was quiet. Everything was quiet. After a minute, I forced myself to move. I opened the door and stepped out. The air felt heavy. Still damp, but somehow heavier than before. Every sound seemed too soft. My boots on the gravel, the hum of the sign above me. Then I noticed the lights. They weren't flickering randomly. They were blinking in a pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. I turned toward the station. The front door was half open, swaying slightly. A warm glow spilled from inside. I took one cautious step forward, and that's when I heard it. A whisper from inside the store. My name. Ben. I stopped cold. The voice was faint. Familiar. My own. I froze in place. The sound wasn't coming from the CB anymore. It drifted out of the gas station doorway, soft and wet, like a breath curling through fog. I took one slow step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. The fog around the truck seemed to move with me, pressing closer, waiting. I didn't want to go in, but something about that open door pulled at me anyway. The lights above the door buzzed and flickered. Each blink threw my shadow long across the gravel. When the glow steadied again, the shadow didn't shrink back. It stayed stretched, arm outstretched toward the door like it wanted in. I swallowed hard and walked forward. The bell above the door didn't ring when I pushed it open, just gave a dull metallic click. Inside smelled like dust, oil, and coffee that had burned too long on a hot plate. A single ceiling light hummed overhead, swinging slightly, throwing lazy circles across shelves of faded snacks and road maps. "Hello?" My voice sounded smaller than I meant it to. Nothing. I moved down one aisle, shoes squeaking faintly on tile that felt damp under the rubber soles. The hum of the light grew louder, almost like it was trying to talk over something else. A whisper hiding underneath the electric drone. Then I heard it again. "Ben." This time the voice came from the far end of the store, near the restrooms. "Ben, hurry." I should have turned and left. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but I kept walking, slow, careful, my hand brushing the counter as if touching something solid would anchor me. The door at the end of the hallway was cracked open. A dim orange glow leaked through, the color of candlelight. I pushed it wider. A small office, desk, chair, calendar, from 1997, pinned crooked on the wall. Papers scattered like they'd been blown by a strong wind. And sitting in the chair, a man, same jacket, same jeans, same scar running across the left hand. It was me. He sat hunched forward, elbows on knees, face buried in his palms. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Then slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes were pale gray, washed out, like glass left in the sea. His lips trembled before they formed words. "You didn't listen." I stumbled back, bumping into the doorframe. What is this?" He smiled. The skin around his mouth cracked. "They warned you not to stop." My stomach turned. "Who warned me?" "The road," he whispered. A low rumble passed through the floor. The light above us dimmed, flickered, then steadied again, softer, warmer. Wrong. The walls seemed to breathe, swelling outward and then tightening, a slow inhale and exhale that pushed dust from the cracks. I looked back toward the hallway. Fog poured in through the open door, sliding along the floor in ribbons. It climbed the shelves, the walls, the desk. The other me stood, joints creaking. "Drive before it learns your name again." He reached for me, fingers stiff and cold. I yanked free, bolted down the hall, through the fog, and out into the parking lot. The night was boiling white. I could barely see the truck. I lunged for the handle, threw myself inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned once, twice, then roared alive like it had never died. I hit the gas, gravel spitting under the tires. When I looked in the mirror, the gas station was gone. No lights, no building, just fog stretching forever. I drove until dawn. The fog finally peeled away near Seaside, gray sky breaking open above me. My hands hurt from gripping the wheel so hard. I pulled into the first diner I saw, parked under a flickering sign, and just sat there. When I stepped out, the early air smelled clean, salt and pine together. Then I saw it. The back of the truck was soaked, streaked with brown water and mud. And handprints. Dozens of them. Long, thin fingers pressed deep into the metal, like something had been crawling on while I drove. I stood there until the wind dried the sweat on my face. Then I got back in and kept driving north. I didn't tell anyone. Not my brother. Not my mom. No one. But sometimes, late at night when I'm on that stretch again, the CB crackles through the quiet. Just a flicker of static, like a sigh. And then a whisper that sounds a lot like my own voice. Don't stop. We left Eugene late that morning, chasing the kind of quiet you only find in the Oregon high country. Erin sat curled in the passenger seat reading directions off her phone while I kept the truck steady through the switchbacks. The rain started somewhere near Oak Ridge, light at first, then heavier, until the wipers could barely keep up. By the time we reached the forest road that climbed toward Crater Ridge, the GPS had already lost service. Just one pale blue dot on a gray screen. Erin zoomed in, frowned, and said, "It says we're here, but I don't see anything." I laughed, more to keep her calm than because it was funny. Probably just around the next bend. The road narrowed to a single lane of ruts and wet clay. Branches scraped along the doors like fingernails, leaving streaks of sap that looked black in the rain. When we finally saw the clearing, both of us went silent. The cabin was smaller than the photos. Darker too, logs almost black with age and moss, chimney leaning just a little off-center. It looked like it had been waiting for us. Inside smelled of cedar, smoke, and something faintly metallic. Our boots echoed on uneven boards. A single kerosene lantern sat on the table beside an old guestbook. Erin ran her fingers along the cover. It was soft, worn, like leather that had been handled too many times. I flipped it open, expecting cheerful scribbles from tourists. Instead, every page was filled with the same handwriting, neat, looping, identical. Each entry signed Evan and Aaron, October 2011. Aaron stared at me. "Did you write this?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. Different Evan, maybe. Common name. But she wasn't convinced. She pointed to a smear where the last signature trailed off. The ink was still wet. We unpacked in silence after that. The wind pressed against the windows hard enough to make the glass hum. Somewhere outside, water dripped steadily off the roof into a metal bucket, keeping time with our breathing. Around dusk, the fog rolled down from the ridge, swallowing the treetops first, then the porch, until even the truck disappeared. The world outside became a wall of white. Aaron tried to joke. "Feels like we're in one of those old postcards." I didn't answer. The air felt heavy, charged, like the moment before lightning. She found more journals in a box under the couch, 5 of them, all identical, dated 10 years apart. 1981, 1991, 2001, 2011, and now 2021. Each filled halfway, and then abruptly blank. The last entry in the newest book read, "We shouldn't have come back." By night, the temperature dropped fast. We lit a small fire, ate soup from the camp stove, and tried to pretend it was cozy. Aaron fell asleep against my shoulder. I sat watching the flames until they blurred, trying to ignore the faint tapping coming from behind the wall. At first, I thought it was the wood settling, but the rhythm was too clean. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. Then one long scrape that traveled from one corner to the other. I whispered her name. She didn't wake. When I stood, the boards beneath my feet shifted, just enough to feel it. Something hollow underneath, like an empty crawl space. I knelt and pressed my ear to the floor. For a second, there was only the faint crackle of cooling embers. Then a whisper. "Evan." I jerked upright so fast I knocked the lantern over. Flame flared, sputtered, died. In the darkness, Aaron whispered, "Did you hear that?" I didn't answer. Because outside, someone knocked on the porch railing, slow, deliberate, twice. I found the flashlight and swept the beam across the window. Nothing but fog. I opened the door anyway. The clearing was silent, but in the beam's edge, near the tree line, 2 sets of footprints shone dark in the wet soil. Bare feet, small, leading straight toward the porch and ending there. I stepped back inside, shut the door, and jammed the bolt. Aaron was at the fireplace, staring at something I couldn't see. "The ashes," she whispered. "They're moving." I crouched beside her. The coals were faintly glowing again, even though the fire had been out for half an hour, and carved into the soot on the bricks were words, shaky, crooked, written with something sharp. "Welcome back." Neither of us slept. Every few minutes, the cabin gave a long, slow groan, like something stretching. The fog pressed against the windows, so thick it left moisture inside the glass. When I checked my phone, the screen showed a full battery, but the date read October 17th, 2011. Aaron's phone said the same. She whispered, "Maybe it's some glitch." But her hands were shaking. We sat by the dying lantern light until just after 2, when the tapping started again, this time from inside the walls. It moved around us, circling, coming from behind the fireplace, the floor, even the ceiling above the bed. Then came a second sound, the slow pull of something dragging across the porch boards. Aaron covered her ears. "Make it stop." I grabbed the keys. "We're leaving." When I opened the door, the fog hit me like cold smoke. The truck sat where we'd left it, but the driver's door hung wide. The interior light flickered, then went dark. And in the seat, half buried in condensation, was another of the journals, open to the first page. Evan and Aaron, October 2011. A fresh line below it. "We're still here. We didn't make it back to the cabin until sunrise. I don't remember the hours between, just running, fog swallowing the sound of our footsteps, Aaron calling my name somewhere ahead of me. When I finally saw the clearing again, the cabin looked new. Fresh logs, bright windows, smoke curling gently from the chimney. Through the window, 2 people sat by the fire, a man and a woman. They were laughing. They were us. Aaron stepped beside me, voice barely a whisper. "Evan, they can see us." Inside, the other me turned his head toward the window and smiled. The lantern in his hand flared bright, washing everything in orange light. When it faded, the cabin was dark again, empty. I woke on the porch, cold dew soaking my clothes. The sun was high, the truck parked neatly by the tree line, keys in the ignition. Inside the cabin, nothing looked disturbed. No footprints, no wet spots, no ashes in the hearth. Only the guest book lying open on the table. One new entry, my handwriting. Evan and Aaron, October 2025. We shouldn't have come back. Morning felt wrong from the moment I opened my eyes. The sunlight through the cabin windows was pale, too cold for morning. It had that washed-out color that usually comes before a thunderstorm. Aaron was still asleep beside me on the couch, clutching the guest book like a child holding a stuffed animal. The fire was dead, the air thick and sour. I stood quietly, walked to the sink to wash my face. The water sputtered from the tap, thick at first, then clear. When I looked down, it wasn't water. The droplets on my hands were brown, and the metallic smell hit me a second later. It was blood. I spun around. The faucet was dry again. No water, no sound. Behind me, Aaron stirred. "Evan, what time is it?" I looked at my phone. October 17th, 2011, 6:41 a.m., battery 100%, no service. "It's morning," I said, but my voice came out like someone else's. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Did we sleep here?" "Yeah, but..." She frowned, turning her head toward the door. "Do you hear that?" I listened. It was faint at first, a low rumbling under the floorboards, like something breathing slowly through the wood. Each inhale pulled the dust inward. Each exhale pushed a soft draft through the cabin. Aaron backed against the wall. "Evan, it's breathing." I walked to the window, trying to focus on something, anything real. The fog had thinned a little, revealing the tree line beyond the clearing. That's when I saw the trail. Not dirt anymore, but water. Like the ground itself had turned to a shallow stream. It ran downhill, away from the cabin toward the ridge's edge, and floating along that stream were photographs, dozens of them. Faces, couples, families, all soaked, blurred, and every single picture had one person's eyes scratched out. I turned back to Aaron, trying to speak, but she was staring past me, her mouth trembling. "What?" I whispered. She lifted a shaking finger toward the corner by the bedroom. The smaller door was back. It hadn't been there when we woke up, but now it was. Same old handle, same faint orange light seeping through the cracks. "Don't open it," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. I stepped closer. The wood around the frame was wet. The air was warmer there, like the heat from a living body. Behind the door, something moved, a shuffling like bare feet across concrete. Then a man's voice, low, familiar. "Please, help me." My throat went dry. It was my voice. I reached for the knob. Aaron grabbed my arm, crying now. "Don't. Please, Evan." "I have to." She let go. "Then I'm not staying here." She ran for the front door, yanked it open, and vanished into the fog before I could stop her. I screamed her name, but the sound didn't carry. The fog swallowed everything, even the echo. I turned back to the small door. The voice came again. "Please, hurry. It's going to start over." I opened it. The same orange glow spilled across my hands. The same exact cabin waited on the other side, only older. Wood splintered, roof sagging, walls caved in from decades of rot. Wind whistled through the gaps. The fireplace was cold, and on the far wall hung dozens of photographs. Every one of them showed us, Aaron and me, in front of this same cabin, but each one was slightly different. In some, she smiled. In others, she looked terrified. In a few, I wasn't in the picture at all. The last photo showed only Aaron standing alone, staring straight ahead, her face pale and lifeless. Behind her, barely visible, something tall leaned out of the fog, its hand resting on her shoulder. I heard the movement behind me. Soft, wet steps. I turned. Erin stood in the doorway, shivering, her clothes soaked. "You went outside," I whispered. She nodded. "I tried to go down the road, but it just loops. I kept seeing this place again and again." Then she held something out to me. A photograph. It was the same picture from the wall, the one where she stood alone. But in this version, my reflection was visible in the window behind her, and my mouth was open mid-scream. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "It was nailed to a tree," she said, "with the date on the back." I turned it over. October 17th, 2025. I dropped the photo. "That's 2 years from now," she whispered. "It doesn't matter. We need to go." But when we turned toward the door, the cabin wasn't the same. The walls had shifted again. The door was gone. The windows were sealed over with rough wood that looked older than the rest. And from beneath the floor, the breathing grew louder. The boards under Erin's feet buckled. She fell, catching herself on the edge of the table. I tried to grab her, but the wood split open, revealing a gap filled with black water. Her legs slipped in up to her knees. "Evan, help me." I pulled hard, but something below the surface grabbed her ankles and yanked. She screamed as her body lurched downward. I gripped her arms until my nails tore skin, but she was sinking fast. I could see shapes moving under the water, hands, dozens of them, pale and twitching, dragging her down. With one last pull, she broke free and rolled onto the floor, coughing, shaking. Her legs were covered in mud, but not just mud, fingerprints. Long streaks pressed deep into her skin, already bruising. We backed against the wall, breathless, listening. The water below stilled. The cabin went silent again. Then a single knock from under the floorboards. 3 seconds later, another. Then a third, directly beneath where we sat. Erin whispered, "It's counting." We stayed there until we saw light through the cracks, the pale gray of morning again. I helped her stand, and together we pushed against the boards sealing the door. They gave way easier than I expected, breaking loose with a sound like bones snapping. Outside, everything looked wrong. The fog wasn't white anymore. It was yellow, thick and shimmering, like light trapped underwater. The trees leaned in strange directions, roots curling above ground like veins. Our truck was still parked where we'd left it. I sprinted toward it. Erin followed, limping, whispering something under her breath. When we reached it, the keys were already in the ignition. The engine started on the first try. I pressed the gas. The tires spun in mud before catching. The road ahead wound through the forest exactly as before, until it didn't. After 10 minutes, we passed the same fallen tree, then the same mile marker, then the same cabin standing in another clearing up ahead. Erin started crying. No, 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 no. I slowed the truck. It wasn't just another cabin, it was ours. The exact same one down to the crooked chimney and the bucket under the roof. Except this time, the porch light was on. And 2 people were standing outside waving for us to stop. It was us. I floored it. The figures didn't move out of the way. Their faces blurred as we passed, their eyes black voids in the reflection of our headlights. When I glanced in the mirror, the road behind us was empty. No cabin. No fog. Just forest. For a moment, I thought we'd made it out. The road widened. Morning light started to break through. Then the engine sputtered. The dashboard lights flickered. Erin looked at me. "Please don't stop." I didn't plan to, but the truck slowed anyway, like something heavy was dragging behind us. I looked out the window and froze. The trees on both sides of the road were gone. In their place stood rows of cabins, hundreds of them stretching into the mist, each one identical, each one breathing softly, fog rising from their roofs like exhaled air. The truck rolled to a stop. The radio crackled. My own voice came through, faint but clear. We shouldn't have come back. The headlights dimmed. The air went still. Erin whispered, "Evan, where are we?" I looked at her. She wasn't Erin anymore. Her skin had gone gray, her eyes glassy. She blinked once, slow, and smiled. "You made it back," she said. "Now it's your turn." When the rescuers found my truck 3 weeks later, it was empty. The road I described on the map didn't exist. There's no record of a Crater Ridge cabin in Oregon state files, but if you drive that direction in fog, past the tree line, sometimes you'll see lights where there shouldn't be any. And if you stop, you might hear two voices, one calling for help and one whispering right behind you. We shouldn't have come back. The sea never sounds the same twice. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it screams. And sometimes, like that first night I spent alone at the Tillamook Head Lighthouse, it sounds like it's breathing through the walls. I took the job because I needed the money, not the quiet. The Oregon Coast Guard was short-staffed, and the lighthouse, one of the last functioning manual beacons, needed a caretaker for winter. 3 months, $3,000. Easy money, the coordinator said. The last keeper, a man named Coyle, left mid-shift. They said he rowed back to shore in the middle of a storm, didn't say a word to anyone, just vanished inland. I didn't ask why. The lighthouse sat half a mile off the coast, built on a basalt island reachable only by a narrow causeway that flooded at high tide. By the time I arrived, the wind had picked up, throwing salt spray so thick it felt like rain. Inside was smaller than I imagined. One circular room per level, everything smelling like oil, rust, and mold. The sleeping cot sat under a porthole that looked straight into the ocean's gray skin. No sound but the pulse of waves below. The light itself rotated above me, creaking, each sweep washing over the glass like a slow blink. Every 30 seconds, the beam cut across the water. Every 30 seconds, I saw something in it. Not shapes, not faces, just the suggestion of movement too far from shore to be human. I made a habit of logging every detail, the way Coyle's records showed. Wind speed, visibility, tide. The logbook was thick, heavy, pages swollen from damp air. He wrote meticulously until November 6th. Then one line, written in shaky ink. There's a second light under the water. I shut the book and left it closed. The first week passed quietly. Each night the fog came in heavy, the beacon slicing through it like a blade. But the sound was changing. The ocean no longer roared. It hummed, low, constant, almost electrical. Sometimes it vibrated through the metal floor, rising through the soles of my boots, through my chest. One night around 2 a.m., the hum stopped. The sudden silence was worse than noise. I walked to the narrow spiral stair and climbed toward the lamp room. Halfway up, I heard it, a single knock on the outside wall of the tower. Impossible. The wind was too strong, the ledge too narrow. Then another knock, closer to the glass. I reached the top, opened the hatch, and froze. There was a man standing on the outside ledge, pressed against the glass. He was soaked, face pale, eyes milky like he'd been underwater too long. One hand rested on the glass. The other held a lantern that burned blue. He mouthed something. I couldn't hear it through the wind. Then the beam of my lighthouse swept across him, and he vanished. I didn't sleep. When daylight came, I climbed out to the platform to check. No footprints, no sign anyone had ever been there. Just a damp outline on the glass. By noon, the hum started again. Only now it came from beneath the tower. I followed the sound to the service hatch under the main floor. It led down to a small storage pit filled with seawater and broken crates. The hum grew louder when I crouched near the drain. I leaned closer, shining my flashlight into the water. The beam reflected off something metallic about 10 feet below, a shape. For a moment I thought it was just an old pipe. Then it moved. A hand reached up and touched the underside of the water's surface, palm flat, like testing glass from below. I fell backward, hit my shoulder, and kicked the hatch closed. The humming stopped instantly. That night, the radio crackled to life for the first time. I didn't touch it. It just came on, faint static followed by a man's voice. Coyle. Coyle, you there? I grabbed the mic. This isn't Coyle. Who is this? Static. Then the same voice, slower. You shouldn't have taken his shift. The line went dead. I waited a long time before I could move again. By the second week, I started seeing things in the beam more clearly. Figures just below the surface, arms outstretched, drifting upward, faces pale and turned toward the light. Each night there were more. One evening I noticed something else. The beacon's rotation had slowed. Every pass took 40 seconds instead of 30. And between sweeps, the room grew darker than it should. When I checked the mechanism, I found the gears wet, dripping water that wasn't seawater. It was thick, clear, and smelled like oil and decay. The logbook was open on the desk again, though I hadn't touched it. A new entry written below Coyle's last line. The second light is calling for the first. I climbed the stairs again, half expecting to find him, the drowned man, waiting on the ledge. But what I saw was worse. A second beam shone from the water, directly beneath the lighthouse. It moved in sync with mine, but in reverse. When my beam swept right, the underwater light swept left, and each time they met in the middle, the entire ocean surface shimmered like glass. I leaned closer to the window. Through the shimmer, I saw faces pressed against the underside of the water, mouths open, eyes wide. They were all looking up, and then for a single heartbeat, they all blinked at once. That was the moment I stopped writing logs, because when I looked down at the page, the ink wasn't black anymore, it was blue. Salt water dripped from the pen, and the entry had already written itself. Keeper 47, submerged. The next morning I found the sea calm. No waves, just a flat gray mirror stretching to the horizon. The air smelled strange, sweet, almost metallic. The tide had gone out farther than I'd ever seen. The causeway was visible all the way to shore, slick and glistening in the sun. I thought about leaving, but the generator had stopped sometime during the night, and the spare fuel drums were empty. The boat radio was dead. The batteries in my flashlight had corroded. Even my watch had frozen at 2:14 a.m., the moment I'd seen the second light rise from the water. For a while, I just sat there staring at the sea, feeling it staring back. At noon, I went to the supply shed. The padlock was gone. Inside, everything had been rearranged, boxes stacked in a spiral, pointing toward the hatch that led down beneath the tower. I don't know what made me open it again. Curiosity? Madness? It didn't matter anymore. The humming had returned. Lower now, like a heartbeat slowed to half speed. The air below was colder, heavier. The smell hit me, brine and something rotten sweet. I climbed down the ladder. The pit was deeper than before, at least 20 feet of dark water. And floating in the center of it was the logbook. I reached with the broom handle, pulled it close. When I opened it, the pages weren't wet. They were dry, crisp, almost warm to the touch. Every line had been rewritten in that same blue ink. Only one entry stood out, fresh and trembling. Surface breached. The drowned want light. Then, a sound. Voices. Faint. Layered. Like dozens whispering through a tunnel. I leaned closer to the water. The surface rippled, showing faces again. But these weren't distant shapes. They were pressed against the water from below, clear as glass. One of them was mine. I climbed the ladder so fast I missed a rung and scraped my shin raw. Blood dripped down, hissing when it hit the floor. When I slammed the hatch shut, the humming stopped. But something else started. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, circling the base of the tower. Wet soles on metal. I pressed my ear to the door. The steps stopped directly outside. Then a single knock. 3 seconds later, another. Then a third. The same pattern Coyle used to signal arrival according to the old records. I whispered, "Who's there?" No reply. When I finally looked through the porthole, the beam from the lighthouse swept across the rocks below. And there he was again. The drowned man, lantern burning blue. Only this time he wasn't outside. He was standing in the reflection. That night, the ocean rose higher than it ever should have. Waves broke against the glass of the bottom windows, spraying salt water across the floor. The foghorn started blasting on its own, steady and mechanical, until the sound warped into something that wasn't a horn anymore. It was a voice. "Light the water." The bulbs overhead flickered. My hands moved before I could think. I cranked the beacon power on full, flooding the coast with blinding white. The reflection below answered with its own pulse of blue. The entire ocean lit up, glowing from beneath like something alive. And within that glow, thousands of figures rising, bodies, men, women, children. Their faces all turned upward, mouths open, singing. The sound was low, almost kind. Then the beam rotated again, and every face screamed. The tower shook. Glass shattered around me. I dropped to my knees as the sound became unbearable. A single note that wasn't coming from the sea anymore. It was coming from inside my skull. I crawled toward the door, tried the latch, locked. I didn't remember locking it. When I looked back, the entire floor was covered in water, and in the reflection, the drowned man was kneeling beside me, whispering through his pale lips. Coyle kept the light too long. His hand reached out from the reflection and touched mine. Cold, like iron. He smiled, teeth dark with algae. Now it's your turn. When I woke, I was in the lamp room, light still spinning. Only now the beacon wasn't white. It was blue. I could see the water from above, glowing in perfect rhythm with the rotation. And for the first time, I understood what Coyle meant. There was a second light under the water. It wasn't reflection, it was the other side. Each time our beams crossed, they opened a window, and something climbed closer. I looked down through the spiral stairwell. Water filled the bottom level completely. Hands pressed against the inside of the hatch, dozens of them, fingers white, nails gone. The metal started to bend. Bolts popped. The tower leaned. The light slowed. And then I saw him again, standing where the causeway met the sea, lantern held high. This time I could hear him perfectly. "Keeper 47, he said, relieved of duty. The hatch burst open. Water surged upward, filling the stairwell, swallowing the light. I grabbed the railing as it hit me, choking on salt. The walls groaned, steel twisting, glass imploding. Something pulled me down, not like drowning, but like gravity reversed, dragging me into the light instead of the dark. For a moment I was weightless, floating in glowing blue. And in that glow I saw every previous keeper, drifting with their lanterns, eyes open, mouths whispering. They weren't screaming anymore. They were singing again. And at the bottom, beneath them all, the true light burned. It wasn't machinery. It was an eye. It opened. And the last thing I remember was the entire ocean blinking back at me. When the Coast Guard arrived weeks later, the Tillamook Head Lighthouse was dark. The beam had stopped for the first time in 100 years. They found the logbook floating in the stairwell, every page blank except for one line, written in blue ink. The sea wanted its light back. Willow's End sits deep in the western Oregon hills, halfway between nowhere and a forgotten highway that locals stopped using sometime back in the 70s. The map shows it as a dot, a place you'd never bother to visit unless you were lost or looking for something you shouldn't find. I wasn't looking for anything at all when I drove in that first evening. I was just following the only gas station light I'd seen in 30 miles, praying the tank would last long enough to reach it. By the time I realized there was no gas station, just a single flickering street lamp outside a sagging diner, it was already too dark to turn back. I told myself it was fine, that I'd get a room somewhere and leave in the morning. But Willow's End didn't have a motel. The only sign that looked promising read rooms available, quiet neighborhood, and pointed toward a dirt road that wound behind the church and through a grove of skeletal pines. The air smelled of wet earth and iron, the kind of smell that sits in the back of your throat. Half a mile down that road, I found a white house with chipped paint and a porch that leaned left, like it had given up on standing straight. The porch light burned weak and yellow. A woman opened the door before I could knock. She looked to be in her 60s, hair pinned tight, a cardigan buttoned wrong at the collar. "You're here for the room," she said, not asked. Her eyes were pale, almost clouded. I nodded. She stepped aside. "Upstairs, second on the right. Pay when you leave." No name, No paperwork, just that. The hallway smelled faintly of lilac and dust. My room was small but clean enough. A bed, a dresser, and a single window facing the cemetery across the street. I hadn't noticed it before. Acres of dark ground, crosses and stones glinting faintly in the rain. A wrought iron fence surrounded it, ornate and freshly painted despite the rest of town looking half dead. I told myself I was too tired to care. I fell asleep to the sound of rain ticking against glass. Around 3 a.m., something woke me. A bell, soft, metallic, one single chime. Then another farther away. I sat up listening. The bells moved in waves across the cemetery, faint but deliberate, like a pattern. When they stopped, I waited, heart hammering. Then came a single sound from right outside the window, clang. I yanked the curtain aside. Nothing. Just fog drifting between the graves. But in the corner of the yard, near the fence, a lantern flickered once before going dark. Morning made everything seem ordinary again. The cemetery looked smaller in daylight, tame even, dew shining on polished stones. The woman, her name was Mabel, I learned, served coffee in the kitchen, black and burnt. I asked about the bells. She didn't look at me when she answered. Old tradition, she said. They tied bells to the dead in case someone woke up down there. The ground likes its jokes. She smiled when she said it, but her hand trembled as she set the mug down. I walked into town after breakfast. Willow's End was barely 10 buildings, a feed store, a hardware shop that hadn't been open in years, a church with boards nailed over its doors, and a diner whose neon sign read, "Eats," though half the letters had burned out. Inside the diner sat 4 people, and a man I recognized from across the cemetery, the caretaker. His name tag read Vern. He looked about 70, skin leathered by years of Oregon rain. When I mentioned the bells, conversation at the counter stopped. Vern stirred his coffee slowly. They ring when they need to, he said. Sometimes the ground gets impatient. What does that mean? I asked. He looked at me for the first time. His eyes were pale gray, the same as Mabel's. It means the trade's due. He left money on the counter and walked out. Nobody else spoke after that. By afternoon, the sky turned the color of steel wool. I sat on the porch watching clouds drag over the ridge. Vern's truck passed once, heading toward the graveyard. The bed was empty on the way out and full of shovels on the way back. That evening, Mabel knocked on my door with a small envelope. Inside was a key, new, brass, heavy, and a short note in the same cramped handwriting as the sign I'd followed into town. For when the bells start again, don't open your door. I didn't ask questions. I should have. The bells began just after midnight, faint at first, blending with the wind, then stronger, dozens, ringing at once. The sound filled the street, a metallic chorus vibrating through the walls. I gripped the key until it cut into my palm. Across the road, the fog thickened until it was a wall of white. And through it, shapes moved, slow, deliberate. One carried a lantern. Another pushed something that looked like a wheelbarrow. I couldn't tell if they were alive or not, only that the bells on their wrists rang in perfect rhythm with their steps. Then the front gate of the cemetery creaked open. I saw Vern walk through, his lantern swinging low. He stopped halfway across the street and turned his head toward my window. Even from that distance, I could see his mouth moving. I couldn't hear him through the glass, but I knew what he said. It's your turn. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. The bells grew louder, closer. The floorboards vibrated. Every light in the house flickered and went out. The air filled with the smell of soil and something older. Wet wood, rot, the inside of a grave. Mabel's voice called from downstairs. Use the key. I ran for the door. The knob was ice cold. I jammed the key into the lock, twisted, and heard a sound like a latch sliding deep inside the walls, too deep for any ordinary mechanism. The ringing stopped instantly. Silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. I stood there shaking, waiting for something else to happen. Then a single bell rang right outside the door. Slow, measured. Once, twice, 3 times. The smell of soil seeped through the cracks. When I dared to open the door, the porch was empty. The fog was gone, and nailed to the post was a small brass bell tied to a frayed piece of string. My name was etched into the metal. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At sunrise, I walked to the cemetery. Vern's trailer sat dark. The wheelbarrow stood beside a fresh mound of dirt. The new headstone wasn't finished yet, the marble still blank. The earth around it was wet and soft, as if something had been buried just hours ago. The shovel leaned against the mound. Its handle was slick with moisture that wasn't rain. When I touched the headstone, the surface was warm, like someone had been holding it. I backed away slowly, feeling the ground pulse beneath my boots, as if the soil itself was breathing. A sound rose from beneath my feet. Not quite a voice, not quite a bell. Something between the two, whispering words I couldn't make out. I ran. Didn't stop until I reached the house. Mabel was waiting on the porch, her cardigan buttoned wrong again. She looked relieved to see me. "You listened," she said. "Good. They only take the ones who answer." I wanted to ask what that meant, but her gaze shifted past me toward the road. The fog was rolling in again, thick and white. "You should leave before tonight," she said quietly. "Before they remember your name." I packed before dusk. As I loaded the car, the bells started faintly in the distance, a scattered rhythm carried on the wind. I drove hard until the signal bars returned to my phone, until the air smelled like gasoline instead of damp earth. But 30 miles out, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw movement behind me. Fog spilling over the road, slow but steady, like it was following. I drove faster. The radio crackled with static, then cleared just long enough for a familiar sound to come through. A single bell, then another. Then a voice, Mabel's, whispering through the speakers. "Keep driving, child, don't stop for anyone." When I reached Salem, the tank was nearly empty, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key off. I told myself I'd imagine it, that Willow's end was just some strange dream born of fatigue and fog. I even tried to find it on a map the next morning. Nothing. No road. No town. But later that week, when I stopped at a rest area off I-5, I heard it again, soft and clear through the trees behind the lot. The faint, unmistakable ring of a bell, 3 times in perfect rhythm. And when I turned toward the sound, I saw a small brass bell hanging from a low branch, swaying gently, even though the air was still. My name was etched on it. I told myself I'd never go back. That was the promise. I even managed to keep it, at least for a while. Months passed. The nightmares didn't. I'd wake in the middle of the night to the sound of bells that weren't there. Sometimes I'd hear shovels scraping stone, or my name whispered from under the bed. I'd drive for hours at night, just to exhaust myself enough to sleep. But sleep didn't help. Every dream ended the same. A blank headstone waiting for a name to appear. And each time, it came a little closer to being mine. By spring, I started getting postcards. They didn't have return addresses. Just simple images of small Oregon towns, ones I'd never heard of. The handwriting matched that note Mabel had slipped under my door months before. The first card said, "The trade is open again." The second one just said, "You left something behind." The third had no words at all, just a tiny brass bell drawn in blue ink. I tried to trace the postmarks, but they didn't match any real postal code. One came stamped WN 97000, but there's no such zip code in Oregon. Still, it was enough to pull me back. You can't ignore a place that refuses to forget you. I drove west again that April, toward the fog. The highway was the same, tall firs leaning close, rain turning the pavement into a mirror. But when I reached where the turnoff should have been, it wasn't there. No sign, no dirt road, just a wall of trees. I stopped the car, got out, and stood in the drizzle staring at the forest. The air smelled the same, iron and lilac. Then I heard it. 1 bell, 2, 3. They rang from somewhere deep in the woods, faint but steady, like they were guiding me in. I followed. The forest floor was soft and uneven, roots snaking through moss. After a few minutes, the rain stopped completely, though I could still hear it falling somewhere far behind me. The sound of the bells grew louder, closer, until I saw it. The gate. Willow's end was exactly as I remembered. The cemetery on one side, Mabel's house on the other, the diner sign flickering faintly through the mist. Only everything looked older, more decayed. The paint had peeled off the porch, the church roof had caved in, and the graves looked like they'd been there for centuries, their names half consumed by lichen. I should have left then. But I walked up to the house and knocked. Mabel answered like no time had passed. Her cardigan was buttoned wrong again, her eyes the same pale gray. "You came back," she said softly, not surprised. "I told you they'd remember." "I keep hearing the bells," I said. "I got your postcards." She frowned. "I didn't send you anything. Once you leave, the dead take over correspondence." She stepped aside. "You better come in before they think you're here for collection." The inside of the house hadn't changed either, except for one thing. There were photographs on every wall, dozens of them, black and white, fading. People standing beside graves, smiling faintly. I leaned closer to one and froze. The man in the picture was me, standing beside my grandmother's grave, though I never remembered posing for it. "When did you take these?" I asked. Mabel's eyes dropped to the floor. "They take them. Part of the balance." "What balance?" "The living borrow time," she said. "The dead collect interest." I didn't understand, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. But the house creaked then, a deep moan that came from the walls themselves. The air turned cold. The bells started again outside, not faint this time, but close, dozens of them, ringing in overlapping rhythm. Mabel grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Whatever happens, don't look out that window." The sound grew so loud it was almost deafening. I could feel it vibrating through the floorboards, through my bones. Then it stopped. The silence was worse. A knock came from the door, slow, deliberate, 3 times. Mabel's grip tightened. "If you open it, you'll trade places. That's how they get you." The knocking continued. Then came a voice, muffled but clear. My voice. "Mabel, let me in." She shook her head. "They've been using your name since you left. They want you to claim it." The voice came again, pleading now. "I'm cold. I don't remember where I am." I took a step forward. Mabel's hand shot out, stopping me. "You can't help them. They're not supposed to exist." Then, through the small crack under the door, I saw something move. A shadow spreading across the threshold like liquid. It seeped into the grain of the wood, darkening it. When I stepped back, the shape shifted, rising up, forming a hand. My hand. The sound of fingernails dragging across the door filled the room. The photographs on the walls began to flutter, as if caught in a wind only they could feel. One fell face down, glass shattering. The one beneath it was of Vern, the caretaker, standing beside that same blank headstone. But this time the name wasn't blank anymore. It read, Evan Marsh, 1989-2024. I stumbled backward. Mabel's face had gone pale as chalk. "You shouldn't have come back. The trade's already closed." "What does that mean?" I demanded. She didn't answer. The bells started again, not outside now, but underneath the floor, muffled at first, then louder. Something was moving down there, dragging chains through the dirt. I ran to the window despite her warning. The cemetery was moving. Graves shifted like waves under the soil, mounds rising and falling in sequence. The fog above them churned in spirals, forming shapes, faces, arms, the outlines of bodies. For a split second, I saw Vern standing in the center of it all, lantern raised, as if directing an orchestra. And then the fog swallowed him whole. Mabel screamed for me to run. The floor split down the middle, a crack yawning open beneath the rug. Cold air rushed up, carrying the smell of rot and something sweeter, almost floral. I looked down and saw movement. Hands, dozens of them, reaching up through the dirt, their wrists bound with rope, each one wearing a small brass bell. One hand caught my ankle. The skin was cold and rubbery but strong. I kicked free, grabbed the doorknob, and pulled. The door opened into darkness, not the street, not the porch, just blackness, stretching forever. Mabel shoved me through it. "Run!" she shouted. "Don't look back!" I fell forward, hitting hard ground. The air changed instantly, cold, wet, echoing. When I looked up, I wasn't outside. I was underground. The ceiling arched above me in rough stone, lanterns flickering along the walls. I could hear the bells faintly, distant but closing in. Ahead, a tunnel stretched deeper into the earth. I started walking, too afraid to stop. The walls were lined with plaques, each one engraved with names and dates. Some of the plates had two names connected by a single dash. The second name etched lighter, like it had been added later. When I passed one that read, Mabel Hart, 1937-2024, I froze. Beneath her name was mine. The engraving looked unfinished, the last number missing. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned. Mabel stood at the tunnel entrance, her face gray and hollow, eyes like fog. "I told you not to come back," she said. "Now they'll take both of us." The ground trembled. Bells rang so loud it felt like the air was tearing apart. I ran, stumbling through the tunnel until I saw a faint light ahead. When I reached it, I burst out into the cemetery again. But it wasn't the same. The graves weren't stone anymore. They were glass, and inside each one floated a person, suspended as if underwater, eyes open, mouths moving in silent screams. I saw myself in the third one. The figure inside looked peaceful, almost asleep. Then its eyes opened, and its lips began to move in time with mine. I stepped back, tripping over the edge of a broken headstone. The name on it wasn't mine. It was Mabel's, freshly carved. The ground under it pulsed once, then split. A breath of cold air hit me, carrying the faintest sound of laughter. The next thing I remember is waking up on the highway shoulder, dawn breaking over the hills. My car was parked a few feet away, engine running. My boots were caked in mud, and the brass key from Mabel's envelope was clutched in my hand. When I looked back down the road, there was no sign of Willow's end, no gate, no cemetery, just trees. I drove straight to Portland and never told anyone, not until now. But last week I got another postcard, no picture, no words, just a small bell drawn in blue ink and a date written at the bottom. October 31st, 2025. That's next week. I don't know what they're trading this time, maybe time itself, maybe names. But every night since, I've heard it again. Those 3 slow chimes outside my window. And last night when I looked in the mirror, I saw fog rolling behind my reflection, a figure standing where I should have been. He looked just like me. And when I leaned closer, I realized the glass wasn't reflecting anymore. It was clear, like I was staring through a window into the ground below. When I first saw the house, it looked more like a memory than a place. The fog off the Pacific was so thick it erased half the coastline, and the cliff it sat on jutted out into that gray, nothing like a shipwreck turned upright. I hadn't planned on stopping. I was just driving south from Yachats, trying to outrun the silence that had been following me since Lydia's accident. But the sight of that house, peeling white paint, windows blind with salt, made me pull over. It was exactly the kind of place she would have stopped for. Lydia loved ruins. She used to say every broken thing deserved at least one more chance. The for sale sign was half buried in grass. I don't remember deciding to walk up the path, but the next thing I knew, I was standing on the porch, looking through the glass at the sea beyond. The realtor's number was faded, but I called anyway. By the end of that week, the house was mine. People said it was a foolish purchase, that cliffside foundations rot, that the storms would eat it alive. They were right, of course, but it didn't matter. I wasn't trying to make a home. I was trying to build an apology. The day I moved in, the air inside smelled of wet wood and something faintly sweet, like lilies gone sour. The rooms were empty except for a rocking chair in the corner of the living room. When I pushed it, it rocked once and stopped, as though the air itself resisted movement. I opened every window to let the sea breeze in, but it only made the silence thicker. That first night, I slept on the floor in a sleeping bag. The waves sounded close enough to touch. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the creak of the rocker moving on its own. One slow sway forward, one back, and then a whisper so soft I thought it was the wind. My name, Caleb. I sat up, heart punching at my ribs. The chair was still again. I waited a long time, listening. Nothing but surf and the faint tick of rain against the glass. I told myself I'd imagined it. Grief plays tricks. Everyone says that. Still, I left the lamp on until morning. The next few days were simple enough. I fixed the gutters, cleared debris from the porch, patched the leaking roof. The work helped. I could almost pretend the house was grateful. It groaned when I drove new nails, exhaled when I opened the stuck windows. Sometimes I'd talk to it without thinking. That's better, isn't it? Like I used to talk to Lydia when I was fixing her garden shed. Maybe that's why I didn't feel afraid when the whispers came again. It started as a single sound under the floorboards, like a breath drawn through wood. Then, one evening while sanding the banister, I heard her voice clearly behind me. "You missed a spot." I dropped the sander. The room was empty. The air shimmered, though, the way it does above pavement in summer. My throat closed up. "Lydia," I whispered, and for the first time in months, saying her name didn't hurt. It burned. Her laughter came, softly from the hall, the way she used to laugh when she was pretending to scold me. I followed it stupidly, as if I could follow sound into the past. Each step echoed too loud, like the floor was hollow beneath me. The laughter stopped outside the bathroom door. It was closed. The knob was cold under my hand, damp like it had been in fog. I opened it slowly. Steam rolled out. The mirror above the sink was fogged, but there were words drawn into it. The letters uneven, as if traced by a fingertip. "You came back." I stumbled backward, knocking into the wall. The mirror cleared instantly, empty. I didn't sleep that night either. I stayed in the living room, with every light on, hammer in my lap, waiting for the house to exhale again. By morning, the whispers had faded. I told myself it was exhaustion and auditory hallucination, anything rational. But when I stepped outside, I saw footprints in the damp wood of the porch, bare feet smaller than mine, leading from the door to the cliff's edge. They ended abruptly at the railing where Lydia's car had gone over. I drove into town that afternoon, needing voices that weren't my own. Yachat's has a small diner by the harbor. The waitress was an older woman named June, who seemed to know everyone. When she asked where I was staying, I hesitated. "The old Whitehurst place," I said finally. Her face went pale. "You mean the one on Whisper's Edge?" I nodded. She poured coffee without looking at me. "You'll want to keep the window shut at night," she said quietly. "The wind carries things up from the water." When I asked what she meant, she just shook her head. A man at the counter spoke up instead. "That house doesn't like being alone," he said. "Last owner boarded the walls from the inside, said it was talking through the pipes." He laughed, but nobody else did. I went back before dark, uneasy but still clinging to logic. I'd had nights like this after Lydia died. Phantom sounds, voices when I was half asleep. The mind fills empty rooms. That's what I told myself when I heard her humming again that evening, a soft tune drifting through the vents. I traced it to the basement door. The handle trembled under my hand like something was breathing behind it. The basement smelled of brine and rust. My flashlight beam caught dozens of nail marks on the walls, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. In the far corner stood a half-finished wall of plaster, newer than the rest of the foundation. When I knocked, it sounded hollow. I pressed my ear against it. For a moment, nothing. Then a whisper right behind the wall. "Caleb, please don't leave me again." My knees almost gave out. "Lydia." The wall thudded once from the inside. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. It rolled, its beam cutting across the floor. And that's when I saw it. A dark stain spreading from the base of the wall, seeping like water, but thicker, glossier. It crept toward me, slow and deliberate. I bolted up the stairs, slammed the door, and wedged a chair beneath the knob. The whisper kept going for hours, muffled now, softer, almost a lullaby. I spent the next day outside, fixing anything that could be fixed. I told myself I'd call a contractor, that I'd have the basement sealed properly, that this was just rot and moisture. But every nail I drove into the siding came out wet. The wood bled. That night the house began to shift. The walls groaned, the floorboards swelled like lungs, inhaling. I could hear movement in the pipes, a slow gurgle that formed shapes, half words. When I covered my ears, I could still hear her voice in my skull. "You left me in the dark." I shouted that she wasn't real, that she died instantly in the crash, but the air itself seemed to disagree. The lights flickered once and went out. The sound of the sea grew louder, closer, until it felt like the waves were inside the house. Then came the smell of lilies again, strong enough to make me gag. The whisper spoke right behind me. "You promised to finish the house." I turned, and for one impossible second she was there. Lydia, standing in the hallway, skin gray with sea spray, hair plastered to her cheeks. She looked at me with that same sad smile she'd worn the morning she died. I reached out. My hand went through her like mist. The house groaned violently, the floor shaking. Her voice filled every room now, layered on itself, dozens of Lydias speaking at once. "Stay, stay, stay." I ran for the door, but the knob turned red hot in my hand. The windows slammed shut. The walls pulsed. Then silence, thick and absolute. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the hallway anymore. I was standing in the bathroom again, steam rising from the tub. The mirror was fogged over, but this time there were no words. Just a reflection of me, and behind me, the outline of Lydia's face forming in the mist, her eyes where mine should have been. I screamed and swung my fist through the glass. It shattered, but the image didn't disappear. Each fragment held a piece of her, an eye, a smile, a whisper. The pieces began to slide toward one another, aligning, rebuilding her image across the broken shards. Then they whispered together, perfectly in sync. "Welcome home." That's when I finally realized what the house wanted. It wasn't haunted. It was hungry. Every memory I brought into it became another brick, another wall. It wasn't speaking to me. It was learning me. I grabbed my keys and ran. The front door opened easily this time, as if inviting me to go. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the cliff edge. I could barely see the path. Behind me, the house exhaled, a deep, wet sigh. The porch light flickered once. Then I heard her voice again, softer now, almost kind. "It's all right, Caleb. I'll finish it for you." The ground shook. Boards creaked. I looked back once, and in the upper window, I saw her, silhouette holding the hammer I'd left by the chair. Each swing echoed like a heartbeat. The house seemed to grow with every blow. The cliff beneath it cracked, spilling small stones down toward the surf. I drove until sunrise, until the ocean was just a rumor in the rearview mirror. But when I stopped for gas hours later, I noticed the smell. Lilies. Sweet, cloying, impossible. I checked the back seat. My toolbox was there, but every hammer, every nail inside was rusted, wet with salt water. And taped to the inside of the lid was a single scrap of mirror, edges smooth, surface clean. When I tilted it toward the light, I saw the reflection of the house behind me, its windows blinking open like eyes. 3 days after I fled the coast, the mirror shard started to hum. At first it was faint, like a seashell held to the ear. But by the third night, the sound had rhythm, a slow inhale, a longer exhale. I wrapped the shard in a towel and shoved it in a drawer, but the hum soaked through the fabric and into the walls. Wherever I slept, it found me. I'd wake at the same hour Lydia died, 2:14 a.m., to the smell of salt and lilies and that whisper just beneath hearing. Home. I tried to live normally. I took a small restoration job in Eugene, stayed in motels with no view of water, kept the TV running all night for company. But whenever the screen flickered, I saw the faint reflection of the house behind me. Never the same angle twice. as if the camera was moving through its rooms. When I unplugged the set, I could still see the glow on the glass, that same upstairs window pulsing like a heartbeat. I told myself it was trauma. That's what people said when they noticed the bruised circles under my eyes. They didn't see the condensation on the motel mirrors that spelled her name. On the 6th night, the humming stopped. Silence should have been a relief, but the quiet pressed in until it felt like something enormous was waiting just outside my hearing. I turned on the radio for noise. The dial caught only one station, a woman's voice reading numbers slowly, monotonously. Then, after a pause, she said my name. Once. Calm, patient, certain. That broke me. I packed before dawn and drove west until the trees thickened and the air tasted of brine. I told myself I was going back to destroy it, to finish what I'd started. But the truth was simpler. I'd never really left. The house had been carrying me back the entire time, whisper by whisper. By the time I reached Yachats again, fog had rolled so thick the headlights were useless. The road narrowed to a single lane, hugging the cliffs. When I turned the final corner, I saw it. The Whitehurst house, perfectly lit despite the power lines lying flat against the ground. Every window glowed the same soft yellow as the porch lamp had that first night. I stopped the car, but left the engine running, afraid that if it died, I would too. The front door was open. The inside smelled like salt and wet, plaster. I called her name once, and the echo that answered came from every room at once. The floorboards shimmered under a thin film of water, and the walls were wrong. Each one was painted with scenes from my life. The workshop, the wedding, Lydia laughing in the garden. But they weren't paintings. The surfaces moved, looping endlessly like windows into time. I saw myself hammering nails, smiling, turning toward the camera, and then pausing, looking straight at me. The me inside the wall smiled wider. I staggered back into the hallway. A child's voice giggled behind me, followed by Lydia's soft humming. The melody wound upward, notes unraveling into whispers that came from the ceiling vents, the pipes, the grain of the wood itself. You came back. We can finish now. Every door in the house creaked open simultaneously. Inside each room, the furniture had rearranged into new shapes. A crib, a table, a bed, made from mismatched boards and bits of plaster, as if the house were rebuilding itself from memory, but didn't remember what belonged where. I saw my toolbox lying open on the floor. Every hammer inside was bent, handles warped like melted wax. The nails had fused into one long spiral. The stairs groaned above me. I followed the sound, hand on the wall for balance. It felt warm, like skin. When I reached the landing, the temperature dropped. The bedroom door was half closed, light seeping through the gap in slow pulses. I pushed it open. The room was perfect. Our bed, her books, the curtains she'd sewn, even the cup on the nightstand. The life we'd had, reconstructed exactly. Lydia stood at the window, hair dark with sea mist, wearing the same blue sweater she'd died in. She didn't turn when I spoke. "Lydia, please. What is this?" Her reflection in the glass moved before she did. It faced me, smiling, while her body remained still. "You built it for me," it said. The real Lydia, or whatever was left, began to cry, silent tears that left salt streaks down her cheeks. "They said it needed a foundation," she whispered. "You left a space when you ran. The house needs to fill it." I shook my head. "It's just wood, Lydia. It's not alive." The reflection laughed softly. "Everything that remembers is alive." The window glass rippled like water. The reflection reached out, its hand pressing against the inside of the pane until the glass bulged outward. "Let's finish it together." I backed away, but the floorboards swelled beneath me, nails popping one by one. Hands, wooden, skeletal, rose from the gaps, gripping my ankles. I yanked free and ran for the stairs, but the hallway had changed. It was longer now, lined with doors that hadn't been there before. Behind each one, I could hear muffled versions of my own voice arguing, laughing, begging. I picked one at random and threw it open. On the other side was a version of the living room, half submerged in water. My own body floated face down, a hammer still clutched in its hand. The moment I stepped back, the door slammed shut, and another whisper came from behind me. "You left me in the dark." The ceiling above split with a sound like fabric tearing. Water gushed through, cold and heavy. I ran, wading through it, until I reached the front door. The knob turned easily. Outside, the fog had cleared just enough to reveal the cliff's edge. The ocean below glowed faintly, as though reflecting unseen lightning. The house's shadow stretched long across the ground, longer than it should have been. In its outline, I saw movement, rooms shifting, windows breathing. The entire structure was pulsing, inhaling the fog, exhaling light. Lydia's voice carried on the wind. "You built it from love, Caleb. Let it have you." I stumbled backward toward the car, but the path had changed. The cliff edge was closer now, crumbling with each step. The ground gave way under my heel, and I dropped to my knees, clinging to a jut of rock. The sea roared below. When I looked back, the house stood perfectly still, every window dark except one upstairs, the bedroom. She stood there, hand raised, palm against the glass. For a moment she looked like herself again. Then the window opened and the sea rushed upward. The next thing I remember is waking on wet sand. The wreck of a house lay half collapsed on the cliff behind me, its walls twisted inward like a throat closing. The tide was retreating, dragging fragments of timber and glass into the waves. I crawled to my feet, coughing up salt water. The beach was scattered with pieces of mirror, each one showing a different part of the house still intact. In one shard, I saw Lydia standing in the window, smiling. In another, I saw myself beside her. I screamed and smashed them with a rock until the reflections were gone. But even after the glass turned to glittering sand, the images stayed in my head, bright and exact. When I looked up, the fog was closing in again. The house was gone. Only the cliff remained, smooth as if nothing had ever been built there. I walked for hours along the shoreline, hoping to find a road, but every curve of the coast looked the same. Gray water, gray sky, gulls circling. By evening, I found a small shack inland, half collapsed. I built a fire and tried not to listen, but when the wind came off the ocean, it carried her voice with it, whispering through the cracks in the boards. "Finish it." I stayed awake until dawn. The fire burned out. The whisper didn't. Somewhere in the distance, wood creaked like a door opening. I thought it was the shack settling, but then I smelled lilies again. Sweet, unbearable. I turned toward the sound. There, just beyond the tree line, stood the Whitehurst house, whole, clean, waiting. The paint gleamed wet in the morning sun. It shouldn't have been there. The cliff was miles away. But the front door was open, and from inside I could see our bedroom, the bed made, curtains, swaying in a wind that didn't reach me. I started walking. I first heard about Rainbridge from a voicemail that shouldn't have existed. It came through my podcast inbox on a Sunday night, time-stamped 2:14 a.m., but the number was blank, no caller ID, no metadata. I played it once, half asleep, and almost deleted it. All I caught was the sound of rain and a child's voice counting softly in the background. 1, 2, 3. Then a whisper close to the mic said, "We're still here, Ms. Kinsey." The line cut off. I sat up in bed, fully awake. Nobody had called me Ms. Kinsey since the news interviews after my last case. By morning, curiosity had already won. Rainbridge was a half-forgotten mill town about 90 miles south of Portland. 50 years ago, a dam burst there, flooding everything east of the river. 27 children were swept away. None were found. The town built a new overpass above the rebuilt section, and somewhere along the way, people started calling it the Rainbridge because the weather never stopped there. The forecast might promise clear skies, but under that bridge it rained. Always. Locals said the sound never faded, even in summer. I told myself it would make a good episode. Grief folklore, lost town mystery, some archival flavor. I packed my recorder, an old Nagra, and drove out the next morning. The closer I got, the thicker the clouds grew until daylight turned the color of dirty steel. My windshield wipers thumped in rhythm with the tires over potholes. When the sign appeared, "Welcome to Rainbridge, Oregon, home of the Fall Festival," someone had scratched out "home of" and written "tomb of" in red paint. The motel sat right beside the river, a row of single-story units facing the highway. The clerk, a man with nicotine fingers and a name tag that read R. Harris, slid the key across the counter without looking up. "You here for the bridge," he said, not asking. People always are. I asked if he'd been around during the flood. He nodded once. "Still am." That was all he said. Room 7 smelled of damp carpet and pine sol. The air conditioner rattled like it was chewing gravel. I set up my gear, ran a level test, and started recording notes. Standard field log, arrival, weather conditions, local attitudes. When I played it back, the first 20 seconds were fine. Then came the sound of children laughing under the static. Faint, distant, but there. I stopped the reel and checked the window. Outside, rain sheeted off the roof, though the parking lot was bone dry. That night, I dreamed I was standing beneath the bridge. The concrete pillars were slick with moss, and water dripped from nowhere, striking the puddles at my feet. Dozens of small hands pressed up through the water's surface, waving like grass in wind. When I woke, my recorder was still running on the nightstand. The tape hissed, then played my own voice whispering, "Your turn." I didn't sleep again. The next morning I drove to the bridge itself. It loomed above the town, a long, gray spine disappearing into fog. The asphalt below was littered with wilted flowers and toy cars coated in grime. I parked and walked beneath one of the arches. The sound of rain was deafening, even though no drops hit my coat. The air shimmered as if the water existed only between worlds. My mic picked up something immediately, a pattern in the sound, rhythmic, almost like a chant layered inside the rainfall. I boosted the gain and froze. The voices were counting again. When I got back to the motel, Harris was sitting outside smoking. I asked if anyone else had ever heard it. He stared at me for a long time before answering. "They count the ones still missing," he said. "Stops when it reaches 27. Then he flicked the cigarette into the rain gutter, even though it wasn't raining. The rest of the afternoon I spent digitizing the recording. The waveform pulsed like a heartbeat, uneven but alive. Around the 40-second mark, one voice separated from the rest. A girl, maybe 8 years old. "Do you want to play, Mara?" she said. Hearing my name in that whisper hit harder than any jump scare. I scrubbed back to confirm, clear as glass. By dusk, the sky opened up for real. Heavy rain hammered the windows until the room vibrated. I unplugged the lamp to cut the buzz, but the light stayed on. Its reflection on the window glass shifted, bending into the shape of small faces peering in from outside. I grabbed the recorder more out of habit than bravery and hit record again. "This is Mara Kinsey," I said. "Day 1 in Rainbridge. Something is wrong with the water." A knock interrupted me. 3 short taps on the door. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. The knocking came again, softer now, from the bathroom wall instead. I opened the door, slowly. The sink faucet was running, though I'd left it off. Water spilled over the edge onto the floor, perfectly clear, except for one detail. A child's marble rolling in the stream, glowing faintly blue. It spun once, stopped, and a voice rose from the drain. "We found your voice. Can we keep it?" I slammed the door and backed into the hallway. Harris was gone. The office light flickered, but never fully turned on. Rain pounded harder, so loud it erased every other sound. I ran to the car, but when I started the engine, the radio came alive on its own. Children's laughter filled the speakers, layered over a weather report that repeated the same line. Flood warning extended until further notice. Driving out of town was impossible. The road to the highway was underwater, though it hadn't rained enough to flood anything. The reflection of the bridge rippled across the surface, upside down and perfect. For a heartbeat, I saw figures standing on that mirrored span, tiny silhouettes holding hands. Then the headlights flickered, and they were gone. I spent the rest of the night in the car with the wipers off, just listening. The rain slowed near dawn, leaving only the hiss of water draining somewhere unseen. I told myself I'd leave first thing in the morning, but when I stepped out, the ground was dry, and the bridge was silent. The only proof that anything had happened was the tape in my recorder. Back in the room, I played it. The first sound was my own voice from hours earlier. The second was another voice overlapping mine, identical in tone and pitch, finishing my sentences a half beat early. Then the counting began again. 1, 2, 3. It didn't stop at 27 this time. It kept climbing. I didn't plan to stay another night. But something in that recording, my own voice finishing my words, made leaving feel unfinished, like closing a book halfway through the last page. I kept telling myself that if I could figure out how it was happening, I could end it. Logic as a shield against fear. So I went back to the bridge. Morning light made Rainbridge look almost normal. Sun on wet asphalt, fog lifting from the riverbanks. I parked under the overpass again, the same spot as before. The air smelled metallic, like rain and something older underneath. Earth after a flood. I set up my mic and pressed record. Day 2, I said, testing natural acoustics under the structure. It sounded professional, detached. But the longer I stood there, the more wrong the place felt. Every sound echoed too long. Even my breathing came back delayed, like something else was inhaling after me. Then came the counting. Not from the bridge this time, but from the water pooled around my feet. It rippled in rhythm. 1, 2, 3, and the reflection staring up wasn't mine anymore. It was a little girl in a yellow raincoat, her mouth moving just slightly ahead of my words. I stumbled back, tripping on something hard. When I looked down, a row of glass marbles rolled out of the mud. Each one glowed faintly, swirling with what looked like smoke inside. There were 27 of them, arranged in a line. I left the equipment where it was and ran. The sound of rain followed, even as I climbed into the car and slammed the door. I drove until I saw the town hall sign, a squat brick building beside the empty post office. The door was unlocked. Inside smelled like mildew and paper rot. I found a stack of old flood reports on a desk. The pages were warped, the ink blurred, but I could still read some names. 27 of them. Children. Beside each name was a check mark, except one. The last name was blank. The clerk from the motel, Harris, was sitting behind me when I turned around. I hadn't heard him come in. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "You should have left when it stopped raining," he said. "Now they think you're the last one." I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head. "They count until the list is full." He stood and walked out into the sunlight, but I swear his shoes didn't leave footprints on the wet floor. Back at the motel, my door was open. The inside of the room looked washed clean. No damp carpet, no mildew smell, no gear. The only thing left was my recorder, sitting in the middle of the bed. The reel spun, even though it was unplugged. I could hear my voice coming from it, whispering the same line over and over. "We found your voice. Can we keep it?" I lifted the recorder, and the sound stopped. The silence afterward was so heavy I could hear my heartbeat. Then the reel clicked once and started again. But this time it wasn't my voice. It was a child's. "We made a place for you." The door creaked open behind me. Rain poured through it, even though the sky outside was clear blue. I ran for the car, but the keys were gone. The steering wheel was wet, slick with condensation, and the smell of lilies filled the air. The same sweet, cloying smell I'd heard about from the flood memorial. I turned toward the rearview mirror and froze. In the back seat sat the girl in the yellow coat, holding the recorder in her lap. Her face was pale, translucent, her hair plastered to her cheeks as if she were still underwater. "Don't worry," she said softly. "It only hurts until you stop breathing." The world around me blurred like a reflection on disturbed water. I blinked and was standing back under the bridge. Rain fell sideways, upward, every direction at once. Dozens of children surrounded me, their outlines flickering like candlelight. They held out marbles glowing brighter now, each one pulsing with what looked like trapped light. "We took their voices," the girl said. "We kept them safe." She pressed one marble into my palm. It was warm. Inside it, I saw a moving image. Me, sitting in the car, still staring into the mirror. It hit me then. I hadn't escaped at all. The town, the bridge, the rain, they weren't places. They were recordings. Loops of every voice that had ever tried to tell the story. And now I was part of it. The girl smiled, and behind her the water began to rise, not from the river, but from the air itself. It soaked into the bridge, into the concrete, into me. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the motel. The recorder sat on the nightstand. The tape hissed softly, then began playing. "This is Mara Kinsey," my voice said. "Day 1 in Rainbridge. Something is wrong with the water." Only this time the sentence didn't stop there. It continued. "I think I know why it never stops raining." The rain began outside, soft at first, then steady, then endless. I went to the window. Across the lot, room 7's light was on, even though I hadn't turned it on. In its reflection, I saw the silhouettes of children standing in the doorway, waiting. The last thing I remember was stepping forward to turn off the recorder. The hiss rose, filled the room, and the voices whispered, 28. When the Red Fern Timber contract hit my inbox, I almost said no. I'd heard the stories. Rusted machines, left standing like crosses, in the Willamette backcountry. A crew that walked off mid-shift and never came back. But the pay was too good, and I needed distance from Portland. After my wife died, silence felt safer when it came with a reason. So I drove 3 hours southeast, following a road that got narrower with every mile until pavement gave up and gravel took over. The forest closed around me, towering Douglas fir and hemlock, old enough to remember axes instead of chainsaws. The air smelled wet and metallic, the way blood smells after rain. Our base was a prefab trailer dropped beside the old mill's foundation. The company had sent a 4-person team, me, a hydrologist named Callie Mertz, a drone operator Tom Keller, and Darius Lowe, a Forest Service liaison who'd done enough government work to stop believing in anything. When we stepped out that first morning, mist hung low over the stumps. You could hear the forest breathing, wind caught somewhere deep inside, moving in long, even exhales. The first thing we noticed were the rows. Every tree that had grown since the mill shut down lined up in perfect grids, as if nature had copied the company's planting schedule. Callie said that was impossible. Rewilding never formed straight lines, but from every hill you could trace them, corridors of trunks marching into the fog. Their bark looked wrong, too, smooth, stretched, almost tanned. When I touched one, it was warm. Not sun warm, body warm. I pulled my hand back, leaving a print that darkened like sweat. By noon, Keller had the drone up. From above, the forest looked geometric, unnatural, a maze of squares nested inside larger squares. In the center sat the skeleton of the mill, its metal roof folded like paper. Darius said, "Looks like a crop circle." Nobody laughed. We followed one of the rows deeper in. Chains from the old skid road still hung in the soil, rusted links half buried among mushrooms. The deeper we walked, the quieter it got until even the birds stopped. When Keller cut a sample core from one trunk, his bit jammed. He twisted harder. The wood split with a wet pop. A dark fluid ran down his gloves. Thick, red-brown, sticky. It smelled like pennies. Callie swore under her breath. "That's hemoglobin," she said. Or something like it. We bagged the sample, but I couldn't shake the sound that came with the cut. A low groan, almost human. Keller joked the tree didn't like needles. I didn't answer. The woods had changed. Every trunk leaned a fraction toward us like they were listening. That night, rain moved in hard. The trailer shook under wind gusts and water hammered the tin roof like footsteps. Keller stayed up watching playback from the drone. Around midnight, he called us over. "Watch this frame," he said. The footage showed us standing by the sample tree. Then, between 1 second and the next, 5 silhouettes appeared behind us, motionless, perfectly spaced between the trunks. When the drone shifted angle, they vanished. Keller rewound. Same result. 5 figures, still as timber. Darius muttered, "Probably lens flare," but he didn't sound convinced. Sleep never came easy after that. I kept hearing wood creak outside, as if the trees were shifting their weight. Around 3 a.m., I stepped out for air. The forest glowed faintly, sick yellow light leaking from the cracks in the bark. For a second, I thought I saw faces in the trunks, flat, stretched expressions, mouths open just enough to breathe. When I blinked, they were gone. My palm itched where I'd touched the warm bark earlier. A dark stain shaped like a fingerprint pulsed under the skin. The next morning, Keller was missing. His cot was soaked with sap that smelled of iron. We followed the trail of prints through the mud to the line of trees behind the trailer. One of the trunks bulged slightly near its base, the bark smooth and pale. A shape pressed outward from underneath. Hand, shoulder, face. Callie screamed. I reached for my axe and hesitated. The outline under the bark twitched, mouth opening soundlessly. When it closed, red sap oozed from the seams like the tree had just swallowed. We didn't cut it open. We couldn't. Darius said we'd radio for evac once the storm cleared, but the antenna refused to tune. All we got was static that sounded like breathing. We packed our gear, though none of us believed we'd make it out before nightfall. By afternoon, the rows had changed. Paths we'd cleared yesterday ended in new walls of trunks, and the map on my GPS spun uselessly. Callie said the trees were migrating, that their roots were moving underground. I wanted to call her crazy, but the vibration under my boots said she was right. At dusk, we found Keller's drone lodged high in a branch, still recording. The lens pointed down at us. I waved to get a sense of distance, then froze. The live feed on the controller showed 4 figures below, us, and a 5th standing just behind me, hand on my shoulder. I turned. Only trees. The camera blinked red, battery dying, but before it cut out, the image flickered to show every trunk lined with eyes. Hundreds of them, open and wet, watching. We ran until dark, tripping through mud, rain, and brush that moved like muscle. Somewhere in the distance, wood kept splitting, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. By the time we reached the trailer, its metal siding bulged outward like something inside was pressing to get free. We didn't go in. We just stood there, soaked and silent, listening to the forest breathe around us. That's when we heard Keller's voice. It came from the trees, not echoing, but speaking. "Jonas," it said, soft and wet. "Come see what we've built." I stepped forward, without meaning to, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam caught the row of trunks nearest the trailer. Their bark had split open down the center, exposing red fibers beneath that pulsed in time with the rain. And carved into the wood, still glistening, were our names. Mine was first. The storm didn't stop. It just changed pitch, softer but meaner, like the forest was holding its breath. We stayed outside because none of us trusted the trailer anymore. The walls had started to bulge from within, metal groaning like ribs under strain. Every so often we'd hear a wet crack, followed by something shifting inside the walls. I remember thinking how the old mill had processed wood the same way, stripping, pressing, reshaping. Only now it felt like the forest was the one doing the manufacturing. Darius kept trying the radio until dawn. The signal never changed, just that breathing static. Around sunrise, Callie pointed to the ridge. The trees moved again. She was right. The straight lines we'd followed in were now bent, curving inwards toward our camp. They were forming a circle. The ground trembled like it had a heartbeat. We decided to hike toward the access road before the path closed completely. We barely made it 50 yards. The soil turned soft, sucking at our boots. Every step released a faint hiss, like air escaping lungs. Then came the smell, rot and iron sharp enough to sting. I brushed against a sapling, and it shivered under my hand. When I looked closer, the bark wasn't bark at all. It was skin. Pale, stretched thin, veins visible beneath. A face flickered beneath it for half a heartbeat. Keller's face. Callie lost it. She grabbed the hatchet from her belt and started hacking at the nearest trunk, screaming his name. The first swing cut deep. The second made the tree lurch, bending toward her. Red sap sprayed her jacket, steaming in the cold air. She stumbled back, coughing, and I saw her reflection in the blood pooling at her feet. Only it wasn't her reflection. It was the version of her from yesterday, clean and whole. The reflection smiled, then sank away. The tree groaned again. When she looked down, the hatchet was gone, swallowed by the wound. We ran. Darius led, flashlight cutting through mist. Every trunk looked alive now, breathing shallowly, bark twitching like muscle. Somewhere behind us, wood split deep and deliberate. The air filled with the sound of whispering, hundreds of voices, male, female, all overlapping. Measure twice, they said, intercut once. Old logging mottos, recycled by the trees. My stomach twisted. I realized what we were hearing weren't ghosts. They were recordings. The forest had kept everything that ever happened here. The men, the saws, the orders shouted over engines, and was replaying them through the wood. By the time we reached the clearing where the old mill stood, the fog had thickened into something you could almost touch. The mill's frame leaned at an angle, vines coiled around rusted girders. We took shelter under the loading bay roof. Callie wouldn't. Stop shaking. Darius went to check the generator, hoping to get light. I looked down and saw fresh footprints leading into the mill. Bare, wet, and too many to count. They trailed toward the central platform. When the lights finally flickered on, I wished they hadn't. The interior walls weren't covered in moss like I'd thought. They were slabs of wood pressed flat, and under the varnish you could see silhouettes. Faces, ribs, fingers. The grain patterns followed human outlines like growth rings shaped by anatomy. The whole mill was built from the crew that disappeared. The forest hadn't taken them, it had used them. Darius yelled something from behind the generator, and then the lights blew. Darkness swallowed us. A wet crack echoed, followed by his scream. I ran toward the sound, slipping on slick floorboards. My flashlight beam caught a shape half sunk into the wall. Darius, eyes open, mouth stretched in a silent gasp. His skin was flattening, threads pulling into the timber grain. When I grabbed his arm, his flesh tore like damp paper. The wall sealed behind him. The whispering grew louder, hundreds of voices blending into one deep rhythmic breath. Callie bolted for the loading door, and I followed. Outside, the forest had closed completely. The ring of trees around the mill glowed faintly red from within. The air pulsed. Then from every trunk, the bark split down the center, and the shapes beneath pressed outward. Torsos, hands, faces, hundreds of them, all in the same slow motion like the forest was being born again. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering the same word. Grow. We ran toward the old logging road, but the path was gone. The mud had hardened into rootwork, interlaced and rising like ribs. Callie stumbled, catching her ankle. I tried to pull her free, but the roots twisted around her leg. She screamed as they dragged her under. The ground swelled once, then flattened, leaving only ripples of blood in the soil. I don't know how long I kept running. The forest stretched forever. No landmarks, no horizon. I could hear the mill behind me creaking, expanding, consuming. My lungs burned. When I finally stopped, I was standing in another clearing, a smaller one, perfectly round. In the center stood a single young tree, no taller than me. A fresh tag was nailed to its trunk, marked with black ink, Hale, Jonas, Specimen. 42. I touched the tag, and the bark warmed under my hand. A heartbeat thudded once, deep in the wood. Then the tree whispered my name. The forest exhaled. The mist rolled in again, thick and sweet with the smell of iron. I dropped to my knees. The soil moved, softening beneath me, pulling me downward inch by inch. Roots curled around my wrists and chest, not tight but patient. I felt a pulse travel up through them into my veins, syncing with my own. The whisper came again, closer now, inside my head. You cut us down, it said. Now we'll keep you standing. I tried to scream, but my throat filled with sap. Warm, metallic, endless. The last thing I saw before my eyes sealed shut was the canopy above, bending inward like a closing mouth. The rain stopped. Silence returned, total, complete, beautiful. Somewhere deep in the wood, the mill began humming again. The cycle restarted. Another voice joined the chorus. Mine. When we started Dark Atlas, I thought we were just cashing in on the algorithm. Haunted place videos, voiceovers, cheap drones, long drives through nowhere, easy clicks. Oregon was supposed to be the season finale, 8 locations in one trip, the 8 haunts of the Northwest. I wrote the intro myself. Every state has ghosts. Oregon has an audience. It sounded clever at the time. We hit record outside Portland. Rain, of course. Rhea was wiring the shotgun mic through the windshield, while Marcus tested the shoulder rig. June sat in back, posting behind-the-scenes clips. None of us noticed that the audio meters were already spiking, even though nobody was talking. Later, when I scrubbed through the raw feed, there was a voice under the hiss saying, "Keep filming." Our first stop was a roadside just outside Salem where, according to local legend, a fog sometimes copies voices. The GPS glitched halfway there, looping the same quarter-mile stretch of road until we realized we'd been driving in a perfect circle. When I checked the drone footage, each pass looked identical except for one detail. 4 figures standing at the shoulder. On the second loop, there were 5. The 5th was me. Marcus laughed it off. Digital echo. He always had excuses. But that night, he muted the monitor feed and kept staring at the silent road as if waiting for something to move. I remember the rain hitting the roof like static, same rhythm as the glitch on our mics. The more we tried to clean the audio, the louder the whispering got. By the time we reached the mountains near Crater Ridge, it was clear the noise wasn't interference. It was a pattern, breathing. Rhea found it first. She layered the sound file over our itinerary. Every peak in the waveform matched a location pin. "It's mapping us," she said. I told her to cut the dramatics, but when we played it backward, the peaks spelled out the coordinates of our next stop, Tillamook Head, a lighthouse site we hadn't even planned to visit. She swore she hadn't entered them. The file had written itself. The drive to the coast took 6 hours, through fog so thick the headlights carved tunnels in it. June kept reading old headlines on her phone, missing crews, shipwreck divers who never surfaced, strange reflections off the surf. When we arrived, the sea was slate gray, the lighthouse just a black tooth on the horizon. We set up on the cliff for a long exposure. Wind shoved the tripod, but the shot stayed dead still. Then lightning flashed, and for one frame the lighthouse windows were lit. In the playback, the light didn't blink off. It stayed there, pulsing faintly, like it was recording us back. That night, our tent smelled like salt and lilies. Rhea woke me at 3 saying someone was whispering through her headphones. I listened. Nothing at first, then my own voice repeating what she said a half beat behind. When I pulled the plug, the whisper kept going. Every story needs an ending. The next morning, Marcus was gone. His camera lay on the beach, lens half buried in sand. We played the last clip. The image shook through fog, tracking footprints that led straight into the surf. At the end, he turned the camera toward himself. Behind him, way out on the waves, a line of lights moved like eyes opening. Then static. The file time-stamped itself 3 minutes into the future. June wanted to leave. I did too. But the footage was gold, too eerie to abandon. We told ourselves he'd come back, that we'd find him inland. We drove south along the coast, hitting the next locations like soldiers on orders. The graveyard at Willow's End, the cliff house near Yachats, the flooded bridge town. Each stop came with a new malfunction. Drones refusing altitude, mics recording voices none of us spoke, cameras adjusting focus toward empty corners. By the 5th site, we realized the equipment wasn't failing. It was directing. The edit logs were rewriting while we slept. 3 new files had appeared on the drive, each one titled with our names: Eli_Raw, Rhea_Raw, June_Raw. Inside were clips of us sleeping, eating, arguing, angles we never shot. Rhea said maybe the cloud auto-synced from somewhere, but we'd been offline for days. Then she noticed the total runtime of all files combined: 35 hours and 00 minutes, same as our projected finale length. That night, the generator died. We lit a lantern, and the flame bent toward the monitors, even though the windows were closed. Rhea whispered that the state was editing itself, trimming what it didn't need. She said it like a fact, not fear. I asked her how she knew, and she said she could hear it breathing through the wires. By morning, the van doors were covered in condensation from the inside. In the fogged glass, someone had traced words with a fingertip: last location. The coordinates below pointed to a stretch of forest east of Eugene, an old mill site called Red Fern Timber. I didn't remember entering it on the schedule, but when I checked our production binder, the name was printed there in my handwriting. We drove there anyway. The forest closed around us, darker than cloud cover alone could explain. Every mile, the road narrowed until it ended at a rusted gate. Beyond it, the trees stood in perfect lines, bark slick with rain. The sound gear buzzed before we even unloaded. Rhea stepped forward, pointing the mic toward the timber rows. "It's talking," she said. I told her to play it back. The headphones hissed. Then my own voice answered from the forest. "We've been waiting for you to finish the story." I turned to the others, but the van behind me was empty. The headlights flickered once and died. In the reflection on the windshield, 3 figures stood where my crew should have been, each holding a camera, each face smooth and blank, like an unfinished cut. They raised the lenses in unison. The red record lights blinked on. The red record lights blinked again, then steadied. For a moment, everything froze. The rain, the air, even the sound. The world felt paused, waiting for me to speak. I raised my camera and pointed it back at them, because that's what I do when I don't understand something. I film it. Through the viewfinder, the figures came into focus. Their lenses weren't glass. They were eyes wide and wet, spinning like shutters. Each blink matched my heartbeat. Rhea's voice came through the headset, faint and distorted. "Eli, don't look at them. They're looking through you." Static swallowed her words. When it cleared, the voice that answered wasn't hers. It was mine, pitched lower, saying, "Keep filming." I dropped the mic. The feedback screeched, echoing through the forest like an alarm. The trees responded, creaking in rhythm, camera tripod straight. It sounded like applause. I ran toward the gate, but it was gone. The road behind me had turned into an unbroken wall of trunks. I could see movement between them. Frames, single flashes of faces caught mid-sentence. My crew, others I didn't recognize, every expression frozen in the act of being recorded. Each trunk held a scene. I realized then what the pattern was. 8 rows, 8 sites, 8 stories. Oregon wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by us. Every story told here left a scar, and the land was editing itself together one body at a time. I shouted for Rhea and June. A voice answered from my pocket. I pulled out the recorder. It was still running. Their voices overlapped in perfect stereo, whispering lines from our previous episodes: roadside fog, the cabin, the lighthouse, the cemetery. Each sentence finished mine before I could speak. The state wasn't collecting tales. It was synchronizing them. I turned the camera toward the mill. Light bled through the seams of the wood, red and pulsing. Inside, I heard the same chant we'd captured at Willow's End, children counting under the rain. 1, 2, 3. Each number came with a flash of faces on the monitors. Rhea's, June's, Marcus's, until the count reached 8. The screen flickered, and my own face filled it. Eyes rolled white. Then the monitor whispered, "Cut." The power surge hit like lightning. Every battery in the van exploded at once, the air filled with burnt plastic smoke. Through it, I saw Rhea standing in the doorway, camera in hand. Her eyes were dark, her mouth moving in perfect sync with the static. "It needs continuity," she said. You started the episode. She pointed the lens at me. Now end it. The ground vibrated. Every tree in the forest leaned inward, their tops bending like boom mics. From beneath the soil came a deep mechanical hum, the sound of hard drives spinning, cables winding through roots. I could feel the vibration climbing up my legs, matching my pulse. I lifted the camera without meaning to. My hands moved like they were being directed. Through the viewfinder, the forest looked almost human. Rows of ribs, a spine of light running north to south. Oregon's shape inverted, veins glowing red across the landscape. Then the voice of the state itself spoke, layered and low. Every story ends where it began. The horizon rippled, mountains bent slightly inward, rivers curved into perfect circles. On the monitor map in the van, the 8 pins marking our chutes flared bright and connected, forming a loop, a sigil, an eye. At its center, the word recording. Rhea stepped beside me. Her skin flickered between frames, living, static, living. Do you see it? She asked. I did. The entire state was a lens. Valleys for sockets, roads for veins, power lines for nerves. All of Oregon had become one camera pointed at the sky. I whispered, "Who's watching?" The clouds answered by parting in a circle, revealing not sun or stars, but a single reflection. Our faces looking down from above, massive, reversed, already recorded. The light swallowed us. I felt myself stretching, flattening, the world turning translucent. Every sound I'd ever captured played backward through me. The fog voices, the rain children, the breathing forest, until silence became a tone too low to hear. My last thought was that this was the real ending. Not death, but footage. Every scream, every whisper archived somewhere deep in the bedrock, looping forever. If you find the Dark Atlas channel online, there's one final upload, no title, just a thumbnail of Oregon at night. When you click play, there's a minute of static, then the screen brightens. 8 silhouettes stand in the rain, cameras aimed at the viewer. One of them raises his hand, points straight ahead, and the caption fades in. Every story needs an audience. Then the lens aperture closes.